My name's Tiffany. I apologize for my voice right now. I'm a bit sick. But I'm going to talk to you guys about my keystone, about mapping out food insecurity in Boston. And before we really get started, we have to look at a couple definitions and some statistics. So the United States Department of Agriculture defines low food insecurity as having access to food of a reduced quality and not being able to maintain a healthy or active lifestyle. And very low food insecurity means having low access to food, but also being hungry at the same time. There's a difference between having access to unnutritious food and still being full and not even having access to any food to maintain your satiety. And if you look nationally at the United States, the food insecurity rate is about at 12%, and Massachusetts is actually doing a little bit better. Our food insecurity rates are only at about 10.6%. But if you look at this map of Massachusetts, you see that there's a darker portion, and that has the highest food insecurity rates in all of Massachusetts. And you know what that area is? Suffolk County, where we are located in today. Boston and Suffolk County has a food insecurity rate of about 14.9%, higher than Massachusetts and the national average for food insecurity. And out of this 15%, 20% of these people actually don't have access to SNAP benefits. They don't have access to nutritional programs because they don't meet the threshold of being 200% below the poverty level. So what is my project about? What really got me into this? I wanted to create a network because when I used to work at the Community Service Center here at Boston University, I was a program manager of Student Food Rescue, one of the largest student-run food salvage programs in the nation. And as the program manager, I found out there were a lot of difficulties in the logistics side of actually matching donors to recipient sites. The Boston Public Health Commission and a lot of smaller organizations put out brochures every year that show food insecure individuals where they can get meals based on neighborhood and times. They show people where they can go get food at food pantries. But there aren't that many resources actually supporting these food pantries and these meal programs. So what I really wanted to do was make communication more streamlined between donors and recipient sites. Because one of the main problems I found as a program manager was that we would get so many great donations. We get produce, we get fruit, we get bread, and we bring it to a recipient site and they'd be overwhelmed and with joy, but also they can't take everything sometimes. They're getting donations from other places. Timing doesn't work out. They just might not have the fridge space or the volunteers to sort through everything we're bringing them. So unfortunately, we're left with a van full of food and we don't know what to do with it. You know there are programs out in Boston that need this food. There's people you can serve with this food. But it's so hard to find an organization at such short notice who are willing and available to get this extra food. So what I really wanted to do was create kind of a contact list where you know which organizations needed more food, which organizations were willing to give more food, and who was the best person to contact. And even from my project so far, or throughout my whole project, I found that a lot of organizations wanted to make these partnerships, but didn't know where to start. So what did I do? I mapped out a bunch of organizations, about 608 in fact. I got and confirmed information for about 235 of those. So that means I got the best email address, phone number, and the contact person, whether or not they have a need for more food, they were willing to donate more food. And as you can see here, this is just, if you press on each one, it'll show you different contact information. And for Whole Foods specifically, it was interesting because since they are a larger company, they don't have the ability to kind of talk to student projects, to talk and kind of help with this. So I'm going to address that a little bit at the end. But if you look at the other organizations, you can see by color whether or not a recipient site wanted more food. So if you're around that area and you're a donor site, you can reach out to them. You can see if they're a donor and they do want to donate more food. That's in the violet color. And another thing, it has the same organizations, but I'm mapping out distribution this time. We're looking at which sites are recipient sites, donor sites, and distributors. And you can see that it's actually really interesting because a lot of the donors are focused around Cambridge. There's a pretty high density of them. But then if you look at the Roxbury and Dorchester area, there are a lot of recipient sites, but not that many donors there. So how are these organizations getting donations? And a part of the problem is they're not. but there are also a lot of great distributors out there. Boston Area Gleaners is one of the bigger distributors. They connect rural farms and suburban farms to the greater Boston area. So they make sure we're getting fresh produce into the city, because that's where a lot of people are wanting this. A lot of people are recognizing the fact that it's not good enough to just give food to food insecure individuals. You actually need to make sure they're hitting all their major food groups. You need to make sure you're actually feeding them right. Food for free. They are mainly working in the Cambridge, Somerville, Medford area. Loving Spoonfuls is working more in the total greater Boston area. So you can see that each organization has their specific niche, which is great, in addition to all the direct partnerships happening between recipient sites and donors. So what did I learn throughout this project? One, it's really hard to contact over 600 different organizations, but I did manage to contact a decent amount. What I found to be the hardest were really small food pantries that worked in churches, because they just don't have the manpower to answer my calls, or they have specific hours, and then I have specific hours due to class and work. A lot of the bigger organizations that were more corporate had issues with divulging this information, but for the most part, a lot of the recipients and donors I talked to were really helpful in giving me this information. Like I mentioned before, matching of donations is critical. You can't have food being donated to a food pantry at the end of their opening shift instead of the beginning, because that food doesn't go to anyone at the moment, and it just sits there until the next time. We also want to talk about vulnerable populations. I mentioned earlier that about 20% of the food insecure individuals don't actually have access to SNAP benefits or nutritional programs. But we also have to think, are there other populations that we're not reaching out there? And those are the people who are employed, who aren't homeless, but they're not making a living wage. I talked to one recipient organization, and she was telling me how their whole program is focused on serving these food insecure individuals, but a lot of their own employees were food insecure themselves. They weren't getting access to food, and they were the ones working to make that happen. Students are also a huge part of this. They're getting food from their schools. So what happens over the weekend? So what happens over this 3-month break over the summer where they don't have this constant access? And also, it's this weird mismatch. The economy is getting better, but there's still more and more people who need more access to food. And one of the two biggest recommendations I have is we need to incentivize donors more. A lot of the farms that do have all this fresh fruit and vegetables are working on really tight margins. So asking them to harvest their food, put in that time and energy, do the transportation costs into whatever recipient site wants this food, it doesn't work for them. It could actually drive them out of business. So that's kind of where the Boston Area Gleaners come in. They go in, the farmers just tell them, oh, those are the crops you can take. They'll do all their work, they'll do all the transportation, and they also will give a tax deduction for the farmers. So that's a great way to make sure all this excess food that would otherwise sit out in a field and kind of just decompose is getting to the right people. And we also need to do a lot more local and community-based relationships. That's why I mapped everything out. So if you're in a specific area, you can see, oh, these are the donors or these are the recipients near me. You make sure that organizations within a community are actually investing in their community, because it doesn't make sense to have a donor come all the way from Cambridge and donate it to Roxbury when there might be a donor right down the street. You're cutting down on transportation costs, and you're making sure everyone is working to make their community better. So what are my further steps? My goal is to make this information available to these donors and recipient sites so they actually can make this process more streamlined in connecting individuals. The Boston Food Access Council's next meeting is in September, and I'm hoping to present my project to them. I've already reached out to the Boston Public Health Commission, and they actually just got back to me yesterday that they're actually using a lot of my data in their new mapping project that they're going to get out to food insecure individuals. I'm also going to reach out to the Office of Food Access, which is where the councils run out of, to see if they could use any of this information. And I'm currently getting it up onto the Boston Community Service Center's website, because I still do work there right now, and I do know the student food rescue managers and the director and assistant director. So that's where I'm at. So do you guys have any questions at all?
So I'm involved with one of these smaller pantry operations in North Cambridge. And I'd be interested to hear, I know who our primary donors are, and in fact they're the ones that you've described, Food for Free, Gleaners, Greater Boston Food Bank primarily. But I'd be interested to hear more about the other sort of donors involved. I mean, we also get donations, for instance, from local churches and things, but I wondered who else is kind of in the network that you identified.
So in addition to these major distributors, that's what kind of I labeled them as, because they weren't really the people donating food and they weren't the ones working directly with food insecure individuals. They're more facilitating the transportation. Oftentimes you have a lot of the local Trader Joe's and Whole Foods will work with the organizations in their area. A lot of smaller bakeries, other smaller grocery stores, but for the most part, most people are getting it through Food for Free and Loving Spoonfuls in the Greater Boston Food Bank.
Out of the areas in the Greater Boston area, which part would you say needs the most work in making food more readily available?
So there's a difference between having all these recipient sites, organizations working with food insecure individuals, because that's definitely, sorry, let me just go back to the map. You can see that Roxbury and Dorchester really have a high density of organizations that work with food insecure individuals. But like I also mentioned, they don't really have the support in their community, people who can donate them, or to other areas around them. So I'd say that area, but there's a difference between having these organizations and actually supporting them. Any other questions?
This may be kind of straying a bit, but from your project. But do you know what the universities are actually doing? How they are involved, maybe as donors or distributors of food? I mean, obviously, BU is a large operation, multiple dining facilities, eating establishments. Northeastern, the same way. They're both urban schools. What role, if any, did they play?
So what's actually great is that when I worked as a student food rescue program manager, the George Sherman Union actually donated a lot of food to us. Recently, this past year, I think they established a partnership with Food for Free, and they actually have a lot of partnerships with a lot of major universities like Tufts and Harvard, where they actually donate a lot of their meals from the dining hall. The biggest obstacle was there are a lot of laws and nuances about food safety and making sure if you donate this food, are you liable in case someone gets sick in the future? And I think that was a major concern of universities because there is that potential for lawsuits. But I think they worked with Food for Free and developed like a flash freeze system where they can just get the meals right away, prepare them, freeze them, and then give it to Food for Free. No problem.
Okay, this might be a little outside, but I was wondering, you were mentioning like vulnerable populations and like the 20% that are above eligibility for SNAP. Do you know like how they outreach to those people who might not know like that these like cases are there?
I'm not sure about the 20% who aren't eligible, but I do know specifically for the student population because it does range from pre-K to grad school. I had a couple people I reached out to are like, oh, I got into this because I was food insecure as a grad student. But for the younger students, they actually, in Somerville and in Cambridge, they send them home with backpacks full of meals for the weekend. But also the problem with that is if you're food insecure, most likely your whole family is food insecure. If you send a kid home with enough food to feed themselves, they still have to split with the rest of their family. And even though it's kind of helping, it's not keeping one person full the entire weekend. But I do know, at least for the Somerville Homeless Coalition, and they also have a subsect that's for food insecurity. They're trying to raise more funds and do kind of an analysis of Somerville to see if there's a way to target and maintain this. Okay, I think we're all set. Okay, thank you.